Pokémon, those lovable half monster, half animal, half ice cream, half garbage bag creatures that we've grown to love all these years. Everyone, whether a big gamer or not, has a favorite Pokémon. For me, it's Tom Nook. With the franchise enduring over all these years, it's no surprise at all that this has had a healthy presence on the Switch. But how did it get there? What hurdles did it face along the way? And how is it holding up now? Join me as we do a deep dive into the franchise and explore the rise and fall of Pokémon on Nintendo Switch. Let's go back, way back to the far-off land of 2017. Nintendo had just released its new hybrid console, and Pokémon fans were salivating at the thought of their favorite franchise coming to the new system. And it wouldn't take long before they got word of the first title making its way to the Switch. On June 6, 2017, during a special Pokémon Direct broadcast, the Pokémon Company confirmed that their first title debuting on Switch would be none other than Pokkén Tournament DX, a port of the one-on-one fighting game that released on the Wii U a couple years prior. Not exactly what the fans of the Pokémon franchise had been hoping for, but hey, it's a start. And to be fair, Pokkén Tournament was in no way a bad game. It was just more of a niche title compared to the monster collecting RPGs that were the franchise's bread and butter. The new title was shown off in a 4-minute trailer which actually didn't show off a lot of the game and felt more like a commercial for the Switch hardware itself rather than for the game. But at least we did get to see a few glimpses of gameplay. The biggest news was that there would be at least 5 new playable Pokemon, bringing it up to 21 over the Wii U's roster of 16. The game was announced to be released on September 22nd, 2017, but would also have a playable demo available and its own invitational tournament in June at E3 2017. Rest in peace, E3, it was good knowing you. This would be followed up with a new trailer later in August, finally showing us more gameplay including some of the online features, replays, and daily challenges. Nothing really that exciting since its initial announcement, but it was more Pokemon news, so we'll take it. And the game would finally release on September 22nd, 2017. Pokemon fans would finally have a game that they could play on their shiny new systems. Reviews of the title were positive, with an average score of around 80%. Nintendo Life even gave it a score of 90, stating, "Pokkén is a solid choice for Switch because it perfectly suits the console's local multiplayer features. The game's control scheme fits perfectly on a single Joy-Con, which means you can take the fight with you anywhere you wish." To commemorate the launch, Nintendo even released a couple new trainer outfits that you could redeem for free. It wasn't much, but hey, free is free. And the game sold pretty well, selling over 1.54 million copies as of 2022. When Pokkén Tournament first released on the Wii U, I thought it was so much fun. It was so unique for these Pokemon to fight like this, and the overall graphics and environments looked insanely cool. When I first played the game, it was a touch complicated to get the hang of, but it was a great experience, especially back on the Wii U gamepad when each player had their own screen to use. When this game was first announced on Switch, I was completely confused why they even decided to do it. It was a cool game on Switch, but it felt like it had just come out on the Wii U. It was cool to see some new fighters and side characters and even some additional DLC, but I didn't love the game enough to double dip at the time of release. I did eventually buy it used last year when I was starting to feel a little nostalgic for it. And yeah, this game still holds up, and I feel like it was heavily underrated for what it is. The game would receive an update on November of 2017 with a couple quality of life improvements, but the most notable feature was the addition of online team battles. Nintendo has been known to fall behind other consoles a bit with their online offerings, so this was a nice addition to see. The rest of 2017 was pretty quiet, but we got some new content at the end of January 2018 when Pokkén Tournament version 1.2 released. Along with this was the first wave of new Battle Pack DLC, adding Iga Slash as a new playable character and Mega Rayquaza and Mimikyu as support. And then later in March in the same year, the second wave dropped, adding Blastoise as the new fighter, along with Mew and Celebi as supports. And then yeah, that's about it for Pokkén Tournament DX. There has been some balance changes and such since then, but that was the last new content released for this game. It wouldn't be too long until we got our next dose of Pokemon news. In early May 2018, rumors began circulating about 2 new domains that had been registered, PokemonLet'sGoEevee.com and PokemonLet'sGoPikachu.com. Would this finally be the shiny new Pokemon game that Nintendo Switch fans were begging for? Would this be the next generation game? Well, we didn't have to wait long to find out. On May 29th, 2018, Pokémon Company confirmed these rumors to be true with the official announcement of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. These games would be essentially remakes of the classic Pokemon Yellow, which released way back in 1998 on the original Game Boy. That's right, we're going back to Generation 1, baby! Now, I wasn't even alive when the original games came out, so I may not share the same nostalgia that a lot of you might have for the classic 151, but I was excited to experience it for myself. Now, there's something important that we should get out of the way first. For those that have been living under a rock for the last 7 years, there was a little mobile game going around that you may have heard called Pokemon Go. This super addictive mobile game where you wander around and catch Pokemon in real life took the world by storm. Everyone and their grandmother were playing this game. If Pokemon wasn't mainstream before, it was definitely getting everyone's attention now. Now, the reason I mention this is because Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee would be borrowing the capture mechanics from Pokemon Go. No more sadistically beating Pokemon into submission before capturing them. Now you would finally be able to catch your favorite Pokemon simply by throwing a ball at them using motion controls. Ugh. these rarely ever turn out right, but truth be told, they worked pretty well. It was genuinely fun to whip out your Joy-Con and try to throw the ball just right so you'd get a perfect catch. There would still be battling in Let's Go games, of course, in the form of trainer battles you are all used to. There were some other big changes too. Depending on which version you got, you'd start with either Pikachu or Eevee as your starter Pokemon, and they would follow you around on your adventure in the game world just like how Pikachu would in the original Pokemon Yellow. You could also invite some of your other Pokemon to tag along with you this time, while Eevee adorably rides on your head. He's so cute. In addition to this, you're even able to ride some of your Pokemon as mounts, including flying Pokemon like Charizard make some fans' dreams come true. But most importantly, you'd be able to pet your Pokemon using the touchscreen. 10 out of 10 feature. Also of note, this time around, you'd be able to play with friends in local co-op mode. You could toss a Joy-Con to your friend and they would be able to tag along on your journey and help you catch wild Pokemon and battle trainers. They would also be releasing this little guy, the Pokeball Plus. While gimmicky, this is still pretty cool. It's essentially a Pokeball-shaped Joy-Con that you could use with the game for more immersive Pokemon catching. But it also works with Pokemon Go, and I think that's pretty cool. While this announcement may have disappointed some since it wasn't the next core Pokemon game, it was definitely a big deal. The announcement alone sent Nintendo stock prices surging 4%. It was clear people wanted Pokemon on the Switch any way they could get it, which is good because as we know, the Pokemon Company wasn't done yet. In the same broadcast, Pokemon Quest was revealed. Not only was the game announced, but it would also be shadow dropping following the announcement. Pokemon Quest would turn out to be a cute little top-down, free-to-play game for both Nintendo Switch and mobile devices. You'd be playing as the Pokemon themselves this time around, as these cute little blocky-looking Pokemon. Now I'm sure you'll see a resemblance to some of the creatures in Minecraft, and there's no doubt with how popular that game was that this was intentional. For now, only the Switch version would be available, but plans were in place to release the mobile version later in 2018. You'd basically run around battling wild Pokemon, befriending others, leveling them up, and even setting up a base camp, all for free. You can't beat that. The game would go on to be downloaded over 1 million times in just 2 days. I remember playing this game back when it was first released on Nintendo Switch. I got into it for a few days and played it pretty consistently. I thought, whoa, I'm playing a Pokemon game for free. I totally hacked the system. But really it was just an incentive to lure my young brain into microtransaction. Eventually, I just forgot about logging on and decided to play other games. I remember enjoying it for a while and then forgetting about it. This game was clearly designed for handheld play though. Playing it on my Switch handheld was way better than docked because of the dumb cursor. I probably only played about 5 hours or so of this game before I got bored of it. It just had such a mobile gamey feel like a lot of these Pokemon games do. The way it would make you wait for your batteries to recharge didn't belong on Switch, which is why I mainly put it down. It's not a bad game though, and if you're looking for a fun, free Pokemon time, this is great, but better for mobile players for sure. At the end of the broadcast, they dropped some big news. The next core Pokemon game everyone was waiting for would finally grace us with its presence next year in 2019. No other details were released, but we finally got what we wanted. Confirmation that a brand new generation of Pokemon would be coming to the Switch, and we knew roughly when. Things were fairly quiet for the next few months. A few trailers were dropped showing off how your Pokemon could follow you around in Let's Go, and showing some mega evolutions as well as glimpses of some new environments and characters, including fan favorites Jessie and James from the Pokemon anime series, and of course Surfing Pikachu. Then on September 10th, 2018, we got some special news. The first Pokemon-themed special edition Switches were announced, and not one, but two! Well, sort of. To go along with the release of Let's Go games, Nintendo would be releasing a special edition for each game. The systems would be identical, but a copy of either Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee would be pre-installed depending on which version you got. These special editions would feature yellow and brown Joy-Cons representing the respective Pokemon's color. The dock itself would feature artwork of both Pikachu and Eevee, and when the system was placed in it, the color Joy-Cons were on the correct sides, though the colors don't quite match the printing, which is a bit of a shame. But in my opinion, the coolest part of this was the back of the system, which is covered in glossy black silhouettes of the Pokemon contrasted against the matte finish. I just love it. Oh, and each system would come bundled with a Pokeball Plus, which was a nice add. These would be available alongside the launch of the games. We also got a new trailer alongside this announcement. In this one, we were introduced to secret techniques, which were special moves your partner Pokemon could learn, which would allow you to skim across the water, cut down bushes, and more. We also got the new partner powers, which are exclusive new attacks your starter Pokemon can occasionally use in battles, such as Eevee's VV Volley, Bouncy Bubble, Buzzy Buzz, Sizzly Slide, and Pikachu's Splishy Splash and Pika Papow. Who gets to name these moves? But it was also pretty clear Nintendo was trying hard to make your partner feel special and stand out from the regular variants of these Pokemon you might catch out in the wild. We also got to see new glimpses of the remade Celadon City, as well as its gym leader, Erica. A few weeks later, we got our first leak about potentially new Pokemon coming to Let's Go. Data miners analyzing Pokemon Go files uncovered images of a new Pokemon. The game's files listed it as Kecleon, but that ain't Kecleon. Kecleon is a Gen 3 chameleon-looking Pokemon, while this new one looked like a Ditto with a nut for a head. This was further confirmed as the mysterious Pokemon started showing up for Pokemon Go players during that month's month's Community Day event. With no Pokédex record, name, or other info, when caught, it would transform into a Ditto. However, on September 25th, the mystery was solved as the new Pokemon was officially announced as Melton, a Steel-type Pokemon from an unknown region. The only way to get this new Pokemon would be through transferring Pokemon between Go and Let's Go, though it was a little more convoluted than that. In order to get Melton to appear in Pokemon Go, you needed to transfer Pokemon from Go to Let's Go. When doing so, you'll sometimes be rewarded with a mystery box on your phone, which can be used once every 7 days. When you use it, it will attract Melton to your location for 30 minutes. You could then attempt to catch it in Go, and then transfer them to Let's Go. Though you might want to hold off on that, since the only way to evolve Melton into Melmetal is to feed it 400 Melton candy, which can only be accomplished in Pokemon Go. So you're going to be grinding for a while. Sounds annoying? Well, it definitely was. We would get another trailer on November 7th, a week before the game's release. This mainly just showed off some more of the gym leaders, Team Rocket and Elite Four, and other returning favorites. The Pokemon Company was hard at work trying to keep the hype going up to launch. And finally came the day, November 16th, 2018. Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu were finally in fans' hands. The first real Pokemon game on Switch. I bought this game alongside the Pokeball Joy-Con on day one, and this was the peak of my Pokemon Go phase. It was cool that I could play a Pokemon game with its unique controller and use the controller with Pokemon Go. And being able to transfer Pokemon was just a crazy experience. I played a majority of this game with a friend using its awesome local multiplayer feature, and I liked how, just like in Pokemon Go, I didn't need to trigger a battle to catch a stray Pokemon. I could just shake my Joy-Con and call it a day. I do remember it being a tad repetitive after a while, but I enjoyed it for the most part. The game sold pretty darn well, moving over 3 million copies in the first week, making it the fastest selling Switch game at the time, beating Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey. That's crazy. So the game came out, made a ton of money, and everyone was happy, right? Well, while most of us were enjoying the game, there was a vocal crowd of upset fans who began review bombing the titles. Some of these reviews were valid, but the overwhelming majority of zero-score reviews appeared malicious, with people saying the games were a sad excuse for a title, a lazy cash grab, trash for Pokemon, and somehow offensive. When I think of offensive games, Pokemon doesn't come close to making the list. Personally, I don't understand the hate on this one, though in time, as more people actually played the game, the reviews leveled off with an average of 6.3 user score and a 79 critic score. But that's not all in store for 2018, as less than a month later, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate entered the ring! Okay, while this isn't a Pokemon game, it does feature a fair amount of Pokemon, so we can't leave it off the list. Everyone's favorite Nintendo fighting franchise made its way to the Switch and brought some new and returning Pokemon with it. You could play as a multitude of Pokemon characters including Pikachu, Jigglypuff, Pichu, Mewtwo, Pokemon Trainer with Squirtle, Ivysaur, and Charizard, Lucario, Greninja, and Incineroar. On top of that, we got multiple Pokemon themed stages with Saffron City, Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, Spear Pillar, Prism Tower, Unova Pokemon League, and Kalos Pokemon League. Not to mention the dozen of trophies and Pokemon related items. With this, there are officially 2 fighting games that featured Pokemon on Nintendo Switch. February 27th, 2019, it finally happened. The moment we had all been waiting for. The new mainline Pokemon games were announced for Switch. Generation 8 would be known as Pokemon Sword and Shield. This was announced to be a new fully 3D game taking place in the Galar region, which appeared to be based off of UK with a variety of towns and varied landscapes. We also got to see the new starter Pokemon you could choose from this generation, Grookey, Scorbunny, and Sobble. And I gotta say, from this trailer, the game looked amazing. This was the next generation Pokemon game we had all been wanting. It still left us with a ton of questions though. Would this game be fully open world? Would its capture mechanics be like the Let's Go series? Or would it be back to the original system? We'd have to wait for a bit longer to find out. The next news came during a Pokemon press conference at the end of May 2019. While we didn't get any news on the upcoming Sword and Shield, we did get a few other announcements for Switch. First up was Detective Pikachu getting a sequel. This kind of felt like a no-brainer considering how good the Detective Pikachu movie was doing in theaters. The Pokemon Company must have wanted to strike while the iron was still hot, as there were no real details about the game other than it would be coming to the Switch. The game didn't even have a name yet. Next was Pokemon Home. This would essentially be the new iteration of what we had seen with the Pokemon Bank on 3DS, only for Switch. You'd be able to use this app to transfer and trade Pokemon between Let's Go, Sword and Shield, older games via the aforementioned Pokemon Bank, and also the mobile game Pokemon Go. You'd even be able to trade either locally or globally using your mobile device, which really upped the convenience factor of something like this. There were some other announcements for Pokemon Go stuff, Pokemon Sleep, which looked like a fancy sleep tracker, and even a Pokemon clothing line, but none of those were for Switch. It wasn't until June 5th that we got some new info on Sword and Shield via a Pokemon Direct. And wow, without a doubt, from the trailers this was shaping up to be the best looking Pokemon game yet, with day and night cycles, weather, and improved lighting and effects. And what the heck is that? Those Pokemon are massive! Apparently this would be what was replacing Mega Evolutions in Gen 8, Dynamax. Galar region Pokemon can call upon the power of Godzilla and become giant for a limited time in battles. Regardless of how it plays, least, it definitely looks impressive. Multiplayer max raid battles, where 4 trainers can come together to challenge wild Dynamax Pokemon for a chance to try to catch it at the end. We also got introduced to the wild area, which would be an open world zone of this game. So I guess this means the entire game isn't open world, but at least a portion of it would be. This kind of reminded me of the old Safari zones. We also got introduced to some of the new characters for this game, including Professor Magnolia and her assistant Sonia, the current champion Leon, and grass-type gym leader Milo, and your rival for the series, Hop. We also got to see some new Pokemon for the first time. Wooloo, the fluffy sheep Pokemon, Gessifleur, the flowering Pokemon, Dreadnought, the bite Pokemon, looks like a big old snapping turtle, and Corviknight, the raven Pokemon, would also double as the game's fast travel system. But most important were Zamazentan and Zacian, the 2 legendary Pokemon from which Sword and Shield get their name. On one side we have the Sword Doggo, and on the other side we have the Shield Doggo. I personally picked Shield Boy. This game was looking like everything the fans had been clamoring for ages. Nothing could go wrong, right? June 11th, 2019, a day that would go down in infamy among Pokemon fans. Game producer Junichi Masuda dropped the bombshell that only Pokemon in Sword and Shield Galar region Pokedex would be in the game. This was a massive departure from other games in the series. In older games, even if you couldn't catch a certain Pokemon in the wild, you always had the ability to transfer them from a game that did. Now, that wouldn't be a thing, and to say fans would be unhappy would be an understatement. Now, it's not entirely unreasonable for this to happen. We had over 800 Pokemon in total at this point. That's an excessive amount, and some less popular Pokemon probably never see the light of day in most people's playthroughs. But we always had the option, and now that was being taken away from us. And we didn't even know which Pokemon would and wouldn't be making the cut. Your favorite Pokemon that you've caught and trained that has been by your side might be left out in the cold. Not to mention, this kind of went in the face of the tagline the series is known for, gotta catch 'em all. Now it's gotta catch some, I guess. A couple days later, Masuda told US Gamer that the reason for the cut was due to sheer number of Pokemon that would need to be remade and reanimated from scratch to the new title. Masuda stated, "We already have well over 800 Pokemon species, and there's going to be more added in these games. And now that they're on Nintendo Switch, we're creating with a much higher fidelity with higher quality animations." Adding, "We knew at some point we weren't going to be able to indefinitely keep supporting all the Pokemon, and we just found that Sword and Shield would probably be a good point to go back and reevaluate. This makes sense. That's a lot of work, but remember this for later." June 12, 2019, a playable demo of Pokemon Sword and Shield was featured at E3, and with it, a few new Pokemon were discovered by fans. Yamper, a corgi-looking Pokemon, which makes sense as the Queen of England was known for her love of corgis. And this game's region is based off of UK, and Impigant, a dark fairy type with a dumb name. They're seriously running out of ideas here. A couple weeks later, at the end of June, the Pokemon Company released a statement regarding what Pokemon fans would call Dexit. Masuda went on to explain that it had been a very difficult decision, and to remember that even if a specific Pokemon is not available in Pokemon Sword and Shield, that it doesn't mean it will not appear in the future games. This at least helped calm fears that some Pokemon might disappear forever, and potentially hinted at the possibility of some of these Pokemon being added back in the future. Now, remember that bit about how the main reason a lot of Pokemon were being cut was because they had to recreate all these new animations? Well, user Mystic Song on Reddit posted a video to the site comparing the animations shown for Sword and Shield against the older Sun and Moon games from the 3DS. And I gotta say, yikes, something doesn't seem to be adding up here. These look to be copy and pasted directly from the old games, going against the stated reason for the cut. Not looking good. We get a new trailer for Sword and Shield on July 8th. We get to see some closer looks at new Pokemon in this one. Alcremie, which is a fairy-type ice cream Pokemon. The official reveal of Yamper with its little electric butt wiggle. Rolycoly, which looks like a piece of coal mated with a car tire. And Duraludin, a new steel dragon type, which was easily the best out of the bunch. We also got to see some new characters. Chairman Rose of the Galar Pokemon League, his secretary Olena, as well as Bee, the fighting type gym leader who would be unique to Pokemon Sword, and Alistair, who would be unique to Pokemon Shield. Depending on which version you get, certain towns would have different gyms and leaders. We also got to see some more Dynamax transformations, showing us that not only do the Pokemon get bigger, but some can even change their appearance with Dynamax, like Alcremie, which can transform into a giant cake thing. That's pretty cool stuff. A couple days later, we learned we'd be getting a new special edition, Sword and Shield Switch Lite. This gray Switch Lite would feature the red and blue joysticks and buttons matching the colors on the respective game box art, as well as the 2 legendary Pokemon on the back. Not as cool as the Let's Go Switches, but this would be the first special edition the Switch Lite got. So a decent reason for collectors to seek it out. Though, unlike Let's Go, these editions do not come with the game. The next trailer for Sword and Shield dropped on August 7th, 2019. In this, we got to see some new Galarian forms for some Pokemon returning from older titles, including Galarian Weezing, which features smokestacks and green-colored clouds as a reference to pea soup fog. This was a thick, noxious smog London was known for way back during the Industrial Revolution. The more you know. Galarian Zigzagoon, trading its brown stripes for black and gaining a dark type, as well as its evolutions Galarian Lanoon and a brand new evolution, Obstagoon, who looks like he's totally ready to rock out. We were also introduced to Morpeko, a cute little hamster Pokemon that can change the appearance and type of its signature move, Aura Wheel, from electric to dark based on if it's got a full belly or if it's hangry. We also got some new rivals, including Smug-Looking Bead and Leather Jacket-clad Marnie, as well as Team Yell, which are essentially rowdy Marnie stands. Missing from the trailer, but mentioned in an article on the game's website, were the addition of Pokejobs, which sounded like little quests you could send your Pokemon to complete, which would give them experience, as well as the possibility of finding some rare items. This is getting too intense, I gotta sit down. Did you think Obstagoon looked familiar? So did fans, noticing the similarity between the Pokemon and famous KISS band member Gene Simmons. News even reached the man himself, who told Newsweek, Pokemon had been a part of our household for decades, ever since our kids first discovered them, and to see Pokemon pay homage to KISS is flattering. Though Game Freak would not confirm this as a direct inspiration for the Pokemon, it was pretty obvious for anyone with functioning eyes. As part of the World Championship event on August 16th, the Pokemon Company revealed some more info on Sword and Shield. We got to see some new moves like Galarian Weezing neutralizing gas, which can be used to nullify the effect from other abilities, and Corviknight's Mirror Armor, which can reflect stat debuffs back at the attacker. We also saw some new items such as Room Service, which when held can lower your Pokemon's speed when under the effect of the Trick Room move, which essentially flips the battle's turn order. So only good in a very specific use case, but okay. The Eject Pack, which can swap out your Pokemon automatically if it suffers a stat debuff, and a new move called Breaking Swipe, which will lower the attack of all its targets hit, making it useful in team battles. We got to see that some max moves get secondary effects. And finally, the Battle Stadium was revealed, which allows you to battle other trainers from around the world via the internet, and unfortunately, you'd need a Nintendo Switch Online membership to access it. During Gamescom later in August, Game Freak's director of Pokemon Sword and Shield, Shigeru Omori, took us on a video tour of one of the towns in the upcoming game, as well as showing off one of the game's train stations, continuing the drip feed of content to keep the hype train rolling. But we'd get our next proper trailer on September 4th, 2019, during a Nintendo Direct showing off 4 features coming to Sword and Shield. First, you'd be able to customize the look of your trainer, including clothing, outerwear, gloves, as well as hair and makeup. With this, Fashionmon was born, the true endgame. But in all fairness, it was a pretty decent upgrade from the past offerings. Next was Pokemon Camp, where you'd be able to take a break from your adventure and spend some quality time with your Pokemon and play games with them. You'd be able to visit other players' camps as well, allowing you to interact with other players' Pokemon. Then we were treated to the cooking in the form of curry on rice. While in your camp, you'll be able to cook up a batch and feed it to your Pokemon. The ingredients you choose will determine which of the 100+ curry combinations and will get registered in your curry decks. Gotta cook them all. And finally, some new Pokemon. Poltergeist, which is a T-Ghost type Pokemon. Seriously, what's up with Pokemon that are made of food? It's like they want us to eat them. And Cramorant, a flying water type with a weird gulp missile attack, which allows it to spit food at its enemies. But when I do that, people complain. A couple weeks later, we got a short trailer showing off one of the version's exclusive Pokemon you can catch, Surfetch'd, a new evolved form of Farfetch, which would be exclusive to Pokemon Sword. This new form of the classic Pokemon upgrades its signature leak into a lance and gains a shield. Wait, why is this exclusive to Pokemon Sword? It literally has a shield and a lance. It's not a sword. Then in October, we learned that Galarian Ponyta would be exclusive to Shield. Don't let the My Little Pony people see this. I smell a lawsuit. At this point, we were coming up to the home stretch. Only a month ago until the game was released, and we got another trailer focusing around the new Dynamax system and the Gigantamax forms. Here we get to see some of the new forms and moves that accompany them. And if you pre-order or purchase the game before January 15th, you'd be gifted a sausage-looking Gigantamax Meowth. Less than 2 weeks before the game was set to release, we got our first round of leaks. Let's start with the good ones first. The middle evolutions of Grookey and Sobble were leaked, along with what appeared to be some new Pokemon with this unrecognized elephant, which was later known as Cufant, Galarian Meowth, and what appears to be a new evolution for it, Berserker. A couple days later, the final evolutions of the starters were also leaked, showing us Rillaboom, Inteleon, and Cinderace. Furries everywhere rejoiced. And now for the bad. The entire Galar region Pokedex was leaked, including 81 new Pokemon and 13 Galarian forms. But most importantly, it was revealed that only 400 ended up making it into the new game. That's less than half the national Pokedex. The cuts may have been worse than people had expected. Not to be deterred by these leaks, Nintendo pushed on and released a trailer showing off some new quality of life features, such as being able to access Pokemon boxes from virtually anywhere. We also learned about some new items such as Mints, which can change a Pokemon's nature and supplements to improve stats. Then there was the ability to have Pokemon hatch from eggs teach their egg moves, which are moves that those Pokemon wouldn't normally have access to, by leaving the Pokemon along with another of the same species in the nursery. We also got another 5-minute trailer which pretty much just summarized things we've already seen previously. By now, the final Pokedex had spread to fans and they were unhappy. First, the Japanese launch event where the game's producer and director were supposed to attend was cancelled abruptly. The official reasoning was due to operational issues, but I couldn't find any other statement issued by them aside from their apology. This just added further fuel to the fire, sparking speculation that the event was cancelled due to fan backlash over Dexit. Around this time, the Sword and Shield Special Edition Switch Lite mentioned earlier released ahead of the game. Not much else to say about this. Then a ray of hope shined down on Game Freak, even though it was a pretty dark time for them. In the form of a social media campaign, fans of the Pokemon series started using the hashtag #ThankYouGameFreak in an attempt to convey their appreciation and share messages of support and positivity for the developers. During this time, Junichi Masuda stated that there were no plans to bring the full Pokedex to Sword and Shield, and that moving forward, future games would also do the same. We currently have no plans to make the Pokemon that are missing from the Galar Pokedex available in-game. This is an approach that we wanted to continue in future Pokemon games. On November 11th, the final trailer for Sword and Shield was released. Not much new was shown in this trailer, but fans who were avoiding the leaks spotted 2 new unnamed Pokemon in the trailer. These would later be discovered to be Runerigus, an evolution of Yamask, and Mr. Rhyme, an evolution of Galarian Mr. Mime. Remember that appreciation campaign on Twitter? A counter campaign was launched by angry fans who managed to get the hashtag GameFreakLied trending at #1 in the US by the 13th of November. By now, some early copies of the game were already out in the wild, and some modders had already started data mining them, and what they found was shocking. By comparing models from the new game alongside ones from Sun and Moon, revealed that some were essentially reused with minimal alterations, even down to the number of polygons. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, but this was the exact opposite of what Game Freak said would happen, and one of the main reasons for having cut Pokemon from the game in the first place. Here, just take a look at this article from an earlier July interview when asked about it. Masuda and I discussed the issue a great deal. Even for Pokemon Sun and Moon, it's quite a difficult situation to make it possible to bring every Pokemon into the game. Now that we are moving into the Nintendo Switch and remaking models from scratch, we had to make some kind of choice. Never before had we seen so much drama surrounding a Pokemon game. This got so bad that some of the haters even formed a petition asking the President of the United States of America to halt sales of the game. That's dumb. The petition would need 100,000 signatures in order to even get a response, and needless to say, did not get anywhere near that. Imagine being so upset with the game that you try to get the President to stop it. If you ever needed proof that we're in the worst timeline, here it is. With only a few days to go before launch, reviews of the game started rolling in, and despite all the controversies, the games were scoring pretty well with most reviewers. IGN gave it a 9.3 out of 10, calling them the best games in the series, and GameSpot giving them a 9, calling it an incredibly strong showing for the series' proper debut on Switch. Though VG247 gave it a 3 out of 5, calling it ambitious in places but seemingly unfinished in others, and Eurogamer called it desperately flat and a shadow of a former great. November 15th, 2019. Pokemon Sword and Shield have officially launched, and regardless of all the controversies, the game sold like crazy, selling over 6 million copies worldwide in just the opening weekend, making it the new fastest selling Switch title, and even managed to raise the value of Nintendo stocks. When the game first released, you better believe I was gonna try it out. This would finally be the mainline Pokemon game I was gonna play and beat, and boy was I wrong. I found myself super bored in the first hour of gameplay, and not really wanting to continue. I did eventually make my way through a good chunk of the game, but found the long battle load times and dragging story really hard to get through. But that's my opinion, and I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments. Digital Foundry was all ready to go with a video breaking down the performance of the new Switch game on day 1. They described the textures as being low resolution and on the basic side, though other issues were more glaring, with character and Pokemon models often popping in and out of nowhere due to the low render distance. The game ran at 1080p docked, but it used dynamic resolution, dropping at times to go under 900p, and less than 580p when handheld in intensive areas. The frame rate was locked at 30 frames per second, but the game could dip as low as 20 frames per second. They even touched on Pokemon models themselves, comparing models between these and Sun and Moon, noting that they were surprisingly similar, with even some idle animations syncing up between the two. Though they noted that while the model frame wire may be similar, the textures and lighting on the Switch were a massive improvement. Though they did mention a lot of this work had already been done to the original 151 for Let's Go games, which made the idea of cutting a bunch of them from this game an odd decision. It's a pretty interesting video, so I suggest you go check it out for yourself, but after this. And as we've come to expect by now, unhappy fans were already review bombing the game, with some reviews stating, "This game is not just lazy, it actually feels unfinished. Someone needs to tell Game Freak a new entry is supposed to offer something something new. This trash heap is the result of complacency and a lack of effort and dedication. If it had been developed with care and the consumer satisfaction in mind, it would have been a polished title with a lot of content complementing the new features. Sadly, this is not the case. Pretty harsh stuff, but one review summed up exactly why people were this upset, pleading to recognize that these negative reviews, like mine, come from a place of love and passion for the Pokemon series, and a sense of heartbreak and betrayal over seeing what it has become. A mere 2 days after the game's release, modders were hard at work. Twitter users Cyrus M had already managed to port an Omastar into Sword and Shield from the Let's Go series. If a modder could do this in his spare time in just 2 days, what excuse did Game Freak have? But that's enough about Sword and Shield at the moment. Let's talk about something else. Starting November 22nd, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate would be having an in-game event allowing you to catch some new collectible spirits for a limited time. For 5 days, you'd be able to get Zacian, Zamazenta, Grookey, Scorbunny, Sobble, Corviknight, and Morpeko. So at the time you're watching this, they're all long gone by now. November 26, 2019, more drama as the Pokemon Company decided to take legal action against individuals involved in some of the leaks that sprouted up ahead of the game's launch. They stated that these leaks caused irreparable injury and undermined the carefully cultivated excitement and interest in the new games. The leaks themselves were taken from a Sword and Shield strategy guide and then shared online, and from there they spread like wildfire. Interesting to note, apparently they hired forensic experts to track down the 4 Discord users that they think did it. And in December they were granted the ability to force Discord and 4chan to reveal the identities of those individuals. Speaking of Discord, I started one. You should join. Link in description. Moving on to 2020, we got a Pokemon Direct on January 9th, and we were treated to the announcement of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX. That's the long title. This is actually a remake of the 2006 games from the Game Boy Advance, now with the new hand-drawn art style, and it looks unique. It feels like I'm reading an illustrated storybook, but the cool news was that the demo would be available to download later that day. Definitely a nice surprise. Then the big news for the day, Pokemon Sword and Shield would be getting DLC in the form of an expansion pass. This would be available for purchase right away, but would be released in 2 separate parts later in 2020, as the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra. First up, the Isle of Armor. This would take place on a giant island off the coast of the Galar region. You'll be taking up a dojo apprenticeship under the trainer who runs it, Mustard, who was also the mentor of Leon from the base game. New rivals were also revealed, but with a catch. Depending on which version of the base game you owned, your rival would be different. For Sword, you'd get a poison type user, Clara, and with Shield, you'd get a psychic type user, Avery. This kinda sucks, as most players would have already bought their version of the game without even knowing about these upcoming differences. You were locked in before you even had a chance to choose. Next, we got a new Pokemon with Kubfu, a fighting type Pokemon who would be crucial to the story and will eventually evolve into Urshifu with one of 2 different styles. And they would get a Gigantamax form with unique moves depending on which style you choose. Speaking of Gigantamax, your starter Pokemon was shown to get the ability to Hulk out with their own new forms and unique G-Max moves. Also teased were the return of Apricorns from previous games for crafting Pokeballs, an XP charm that will give your team some extra experience and more tutor moves. For those of you that fell into the fashion mon trap, you'll also be getting some new clothing options for your character and even new looks for your bike. The second half of the expansion pass takes place in a frozen mountainous region, aptly named the Crown Tundra. In this one, you'll be the leader of an expedition team, tasked with exploring a new area and encountering Pokemon dens. The new legendary Pokemon this time around is Calyrex, a psychic grass type. There would also be a new multiplayer mode allowing you and friends to explore those underground Pokemon dens and encounter legendaries from other games, including some brand new ones. Oh, and both this and the Isle of Armor would be open world areas similar to the wild area in the base game, getting us one step closer to a true open world Pokemon. Across these 2 titles, more than 200 Pokemon would be getting added to the game. And while this is good, it makes it feel like these Pokemon were cut back so that they could sell it to us later as DLC. Just kinda leaves a bad taste in your mouth, but at least players of the base game would be getting a free update, allowing them to trade for the DLC Pokemon without having to purchase the expansion pass. Also, there was a new update to the base game that would be available later that day, which gives a bit of a preview of what's to come, letting you meet your future rival ahead of time, and you'll be able to catch a Galarian Slowpoke, which can evolve into either Galarian Slowbro in the Isle of Armor or a Galarian Slowking in the Crown Tundra DLC. We also finally got news about the launch of Pokemon Home, the updated replacement for the Pokemon Bank, and it would arrive the following month in February. And to cap off January, new sales numbers were released showing that Pokemon Sword and Shield had now sold over 16 million copies in 2 months. That's almost $1 billion with a B dollars in sales. That's a lot of ka-ching. This is why Pokemon can riz me so hard. I'm so rizzed. Okay, this one's a little obscure, but I think it's pretty neat. There was also a Nintendo Labo Pokemon Quest kit that was exclusive to a Japanese kindergarten magazine on February 1st, 2020. With this kit, you'd be able to build little cardboard cardboard versions of Pikachu, Eevee, and Bulbasaur, and use your Joy-Cons to turn these into essentially remote-controlled Pokemon, and have little sumo battles and stuff. I would have loved to have gotten these over here, but we didn't get much live support in North America. So yeah, it's awesome to see stuff like this, but also kind of sad we never got to experience it. Mid-February, we got an update on the lawsuit from last year. In a joint statement by Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, they announced that some of the Pokemon were released by a reviewer for the Portuguese website F Nintendo, who had received an early copy of the game for review purposes. Both he and F Nintendo failed to handle confidential material, resulting in a clear breach of the confidentiality agreement. As a result, Nintendo will no longer work with F Nintendo, and with that, they were blacklisted. I'm surprised it took them this long with a name like F Nintendo. Looks like they really effed themselves. On February 12, 2020, Pokémon Home released, and as of the launch, an additional 35 Pokémon could be transferred into Sword and Shield if you had them from previous game, including favorites like Bulbasaur, Mew, and their evolutions. With Pokémon Home, you can now transfer Pokémon, access global trades, and even earn some rewards from using it. With it, you can complete research tasks, which are essentially achievements, and earn home points, which can be converted to battle points to send back to Sword and Shield to buy items. You can even earn gifts by using the mobile app. Pokémon Home does have a paid version, but you can still download for free, as well as the accompanying mobile app. The premium plan would have a $15.99 annual subscription, which lets you move Pokemon from the Pokemon Bank, store up to 6,000 Pokemon, place up to 10 Pokemon into the Wonder Box, up to 3 in the global trade system, host room trades, and more. A couple days later, we got a new trailer for Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, showing off some of the new enhanced gameplay and features. Though since this game is a remake, I don't think there's too much mystery left about the game itself, which is supposed to release just a couple weeks after this. And to finish off February of 2020, we got a look at the new mythical Pokemon that would be coming to Pokemon Sword and Shield, Zarude, a dark grass-type monkey that would also be featured in an upcoming film, Pokemon the Movie, Secrets of the Jungle. I'm going to jump ahead a bit since it's relevant. Around this time, a small thing was happening around the world, the pandemic. You've all experienced it, so I won't dwell on it too much, but since a large portion of the developed world shut down for a while, the effects were felt everywhere. Now, while a majority of this in regards to Pokemon was felt mainly by the Pokemon Go community, it had an impact on Sword and Shield too. First, the Pokemon World Championships were cancelled due to the pandemic. This would have been the first one to feature Sword and Shield and would not return until 2022. The second was the release of the aforementioned Pokemon movie was delayed, which in turn delayed the release of Zarude, which was included as a pre-order bonus for the tickets in Japan, along with the shiny Celebi. Eventually, Game Freak changed it so that you could claim these via signing up for their Pokemon Trainer Club newsletter, but the initial distribution of these Pokemon were affected. So with that out of the way, let's continue. March 6th, 2020, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX released for Nintendo Switch. Reviews of this title range from mixed to average on Metacritic. It was definitely an improvement over the original games, and definitely praised for its art style, but the game itself was criticized for its repetitive dungeon and lack of enemy HP bar. IGN called it putting a band-aid on a flawed game that badly needed major surgery, and an unremarkable grindy experience. While this game has its charm, this unique art style made this game look undeniably blurry and low resolution, and the performance was not great either. This is a grid-based dungeon crawler with horrible controls, bad performance, and an icky story. The controls felt super delayed. Whether that's me being impatient as my character walked around the map or the sluggish frame rate, it didn't feel great to control. And say what you will about Pokemon games being made for kids, this story was made for kids. It's all about being a human turned into a Pokemon, and the overall plot wasn't enjoyable to me. All that to say, if you enjoyed the classic games, you'll have a sweet spot for this one. I did manage to play half the amount of the game, but when I look back at it now, it was really underwhelming, and once again, at full price. And if you wanted to buy this game today, good luck, because Nintendo doesn't print them physically anymore. This game is practically impossible to get physically unless you find it used, which is good because I think it's only worth the sliced used price. Regardless of the reviews, the game went on to sell well, as pretty much everything Pokemon does. It jumped right on top of the sales charts in Japan, and eventually went on to sell over 2 million copies. A drop in the hat compared to Sword and Shield, but still pretty good for a more niche style of game. But this wasn't without its fair share of issues. There was a game-breaking bug that some players started to encounter. If the players and their partner were defeated, the third-party member was removed. It could prevent the player from being able to continue. This was patched less than 2 weeks later, but still would have been really annoying for players who encountered it and were forced to start their games over. March 19th, 2020 kicked off a cool new event in Sword and Shield. For a limited time, players could have the chance at catching some of the opposite versions exclusive Pokemon in the max raid battles in their Pokédex completion event. This included Galarian Ponyta, Galarian Galarian Corsola, Galarian Farfetch'd, and Galarian Darumaka. And March ended with some more news about the upcoming Sword and Shield DLC. A new trailer was released showing up some more details about the Gigantamax forms of the starter Pokemon that were teased earlier with Gigantamax Rillaboom, Gigantamax Cinderace, and Gigantamax Inteleon, each of them looking pretty darn impressive. We also got to see more glimpses of the upcoming trainer costumes and card designs, as well as some more interactions with the adorable Cubfu. Nothing really new here aside from the fact the starter Pokemon forms seem to have been finalized. Everything else we had already learned about in earlier trailers. The following week we got another trailer which actually made the upcoming DLC look exciting, with some cinematic shots of new locations, Pokemon, and rivals and gyms. Gotta say, Gigantamax Blastoise looks exceptionally hardcore, and we got our first look at Galarian Slowbro. But that wasn't all. We also got another look at the second wave DLC, the Crown Tundra. The hype train was in the final stretch. June 17th, we also got a few new game announcements. First was Pokemon Cafe Mix, which was a free-to-start puzzle game where you become the owner of a Pokemon Cafe. You'd fulfill orders by completing puzzles, which looked kind of confusing. I have no idea what's actually going on here, but the game looks cute with crisp 2D art for the Pokemon. The game would be free to download, but would have in-game purchases, of which we need to wait for release to see how bad they were. This game would be available on both the Switch and on mobile devices. It took over 20 years, but we'd finally be getting a sequel to Pokémon Snap, the classic Nintendo 64 game where rather than capturing Pokemon to battle with, you captured pictures of them instead. A lot of people have really fond memories of this, so it was pretty big news that they'd finally be getting a new entry in the series. Not many details were given, but my initial impression was that the visuals were amazing. Though since this was an early glimpse, who knows if that's what the game would look like in the end. And of course, the first DLC pack for Sword and Shield were released, the Isle of Armor. I personally didn't play any of the DLCs, but apparently people thought it was good, but not great. While people liked the new completely open world style and the new island was more diverse than the wild area, the DLC was rather short and there didn't seem to be much fun to do once the campaign was over. Along with this release, there was a new event. If 1 million trainers defeated Zeraora in max raid battles before June 28th, everyone would get a shiny Zeraora. But June wasn't over yet. On the 23rd, Pokemon Cafe Mix was released. This game was nothing more than a Pokemon Candy Crush. You can't actually play the Switch version dock. You have to play it handheld. So I would just personally play it on the phone, not your Switch, unless you have a Switch Lite and you don't have a phone. Anyways, it was okay. And for one last surprise, Pokemon Unite was announced. This would be a 5v5 MOBA, sort of like League of Legends or Dota. For those who haven't heard of MOBAs, they are team-based arena games where each team competes against each other to defeat waves of enemies and push their way to the opposing team's base and eventually capture or destroy it. And now we have a Pokemon version of this. We got to see what the arena would look like, and instead of defeating towers like in League of Legends, you'd catch wild Pokemon and deposit them into these points to capture them. As your Pokemon levels up, you can choose which move it learns to help you along the way, with Unite moves being unique to the game. The game would be cross-platform and would be playable on both Switch and mobile devices, and would be free to play. So everyone was happy, right? You should know better by now. When it comes to most games, let alone Pokemon, there's always a portion of the fan base that's impossible to please. This time around, the game was criticized for being developed by Timmy Studio Group, a subsidiary of the game giant Tencent. Tencent itself is controversial on this side of the globe for unethical and anti-competition tactics, as well as its close ties to the Chinese government, but I'm not going to talk about them. But due to this, the Pokemon Unite reveal trailer became the most disliked video on the official Pokemon YouTube channel. Wow, remember when YouTube would show the dislike? This video was later privated and re-uploaded. They used the excuse that due to inaccuracy in the footage, we corrected the video and re-uploaded it. But in reality, it was pretty obvious they were trying to erase the over 150,000 dislikes the video had. The rest of the summer was pretty quiet, until late September when we got another trailer for the second wave of DLC for Sword and Shield. This trailer showed off some new snow-covered locations you'd be exploring. As we learned earlier, you'd be setting off on expeditions and exploring newly discovered Pokemon dens where you'd be able to catch legendary Pokemon which appeared in previous games. You'd also be able to team up with 3 other players and explore these caves while battling Dynamax Pokemon for a chance to catch them. But there was more. You'd also be able to compete in a Galarian Star Tournament. Form a dream team by choosing a partner from trainers you encountered along your journey and aim for the top. Depending on who you pick for your partner, your opponents may change, and you might learn some new things about them during the interaction. The DLC would release on October 22nd, but we would also get a new physical version of the base game with the DLC included later in November. There were a few special events announced to coincide with this, allowing you to collect Pikachus wearing different hats as well as a mystery gift in Pokemon Home for a special Melmetal that can Gigantamax. Near the end of October 2020, an early 2018 version of Pokemon Sword leaked online. Nintendo had become victim of a massive source code leak earlier in the year, and as part of this, early versions of the game was discovered and began circulating online, with some people even streaming it on Twitch, though it seems that footage of this has been scrubbed because I haven't been able to find any footage of it. This build of the game reportedly only featured around 20 Pokemon in it, but oddly enough contained Pokemon which were later scrapped from the release, including Beedrill and Ekans. It's not too often we get to see early versions of games like this, so it was pretty interesting to see, though the method of obtaining it was unfortunate. October 22nd, 2020 saw the release of the second and final wave of Sword and Shield DLC. Review of the Crown Tundra were a bit better than the previous Isle of Armor. IGN scored it an 8 out of 10, stating things such as, unlike wild areas before, the Crown Tundra actually makes much better use of the open world sandbox by cramming it full of legendary Pokemon to track down and secrets to discover. And as opposed to the main criticism that there wasn't much to do after the campaign in the previous DLC, in this version the Dynamax Adventures offer an awesome new game mode seemingly inspired by roguelikes. And with the final DLC, the total number of Pokemon available in Sword and Shield rose to 664. So at this point we've come a pretty long way from Dexit, though around 234 Pokemon were still missing. 2020 came to an end with a neat little trailer for what was now the complete Sword and Shield experience. This trailer was a bit different than previous ones. Here we were treated to a narrated guide to the Galar region akin to a nature documentary. I just like how these companies get creative with things like this as opposed to just standard trailers. On to 2021. In January, the eShop got a listing update for the new Pokémon Snap, revealing that this game would be priced at $60 and would be around 6.8 gigabytes in size, and that the game would be single player only. On the 15th, a leak from the closed beta of Pokemon Unite revealed that we'd be able to dress up our Pokemon in various outfits, which would no doubt be one of the microtransactions the game would include. Moving into February, we got some more info on Pokemon Snap courtesy of a Japanese magazine, Famitsu, and shared with the rest of us thanks to Reddit user Rio Megon. These scans from the magazine showed us some new screenshots as well as detailing over 200 Pokemon would appear in the new game, as opposed to the original 63. And that you'd be able to discover methods of getting Pokemon to look and behave in new and different ways so you can score the best photo. On the same day, news broke that a Japanese man had been arrested for selling hacked Pokemon to Sword and Shield players. The 23-year-old man was accused of violating the Unfair Competition Prevention Act for selling a modified Sobble for 4,400 yen, or approximately $42. It's believed he may have earned upwards of $10,000 selling Pokemon like this. Imagine facing potential jail time for selling hacked Pokemon. Stay in school, kids. February 27th marked the 25th anniversary of the original release Pokemon Red and Green way back on the OG Game Boy, and Game Freak and the Pokemon Company weren't going to let this occasion pass by without some big announcements. First, we got a new trailer for the Pokemon Snap sequel. This time, the game will take place in the Lental region. The game takes place on rails as you embark on your journey to photograph and study Pokemon in your trusty Neo 1. From the trailer, it looks like you'll explore a variety of biomes, including jungle, desert, and even underwater, and at different times of day. We got our first look at the game's professor with Professor Mirror, and his assistant Rita and Phil. And wow, this game looks great! That lighting is top-notch for a Switch title. This time around, you'll be able to throw fruit, Lumina orbs, or play music to influence the Pokemon and their actions in order to get the best shot. Photos you capture will get rated in the Photodex, which you can then share online. Looks like it's shaping up to be a decent addition in the franchise. Next, we got a surprise announcement with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. These would be remakes of Diamond and Pearl from the DS era of Pokemon games. These would not have a full unlocked 3D camera like the more recent Pokemon game. This would be 3D, but locked to an isometric camera angle. So sort of like a mix between Let's Go and the older games. The important thing to note here is that this would not be developed by Game Freak. Instead, it would be made by ILCA, the company behind Pokemon Home. Pretty big departure for a Pokemon RPG, even if it's a remake. Though the original director of Diamond and Pearl would be returning, so there was some hope. The games would focus on preserving the original feel of the game while bringing it in line with more modern 3D visuals. Interestingly enough, this was teased a couple days earlier on Pokemon's Twitter, and potentially leaked back in January by Spanish fan site Centro Pokemon. But now we knew for sure the game would be releasing later that year. And then the real surprise, Pokemon Legends Arceus, a new spin-off of the mainline series. This game would take place in the Sinnoh region far in the past, long before the events of Diamond and Pearl, when the area looked similar to an older era of Japan. This game would be an open-world, third-person action role-playing game where you explore and battle wild Pokemon. And from the looks of it, you won't need to battle a Pokemon to weaken it before capturing it now, though we need to see how it works out. You're tasked with creating Sinnoh's very first Pokedex, and you'll get to choose from the returning starters Rowlet, Cyndaquil, and Oshawott. Arceus was slated to be released early next year in 2022. In March, we got some new Pokemon Snap info as Nintendo invited some game journalists to preview an early build of the game. With this, we learned the game would finally feature voice acting, a much needed feature which we no doubt will see continue in future games, right? We don't. You'd also have a bit of an easier time capturing your photos through the use of the Switch's gyro aiming. As you progress through the game, more Pokemon will start to show up on routes you've already completed, encouraging you to go back and take different paths to see everything. You'll also have access to a scan pulse, which will highlight nearby Pokemon so that you don't miss anything. And even some of the Pokemon will react differently when scanned. Sadly, there is no character customization, which we've gotten used to with some of the more recent titles. We also got confirmation that you would indeed need a Nintendo Switch Online subscription in order to share your photos with the community online, which is a bit of a bummer when there's not even proper multiplayer in the game. Next, never say Game Freak is without a sense of humor. On April 1st, 2021, Game Freak replaced all the raid Pokemon in Sword and Shield with Magikarp for April Fools. To add further insult to injury, there was no way of capturing it. Just kind of thought it was funny to see them trolling these gamers. At the end of April, new Pokemon Snap was being praised as the best looking Pokemon game yet, and I have to agree. Reviews are mostly positive as the new title delivered a similar experience to that of the original while expanding on the formula, as said by Game Informer, and a great sequel that pulled from all 8 generations of Pokemon released so far. And as always, the game sold well over 194,000 copies in its first week in Japan and over 2 million by the end of the year. When new Pokemon Snap was first released, I didn't really think it was worth full price, considering I didn't really have the nostalgia for the first game that the Pokemon team counted on, so I didn't end up buying it until later. And when I did decide to buy it, I didn't even buy it for myself. I actually found a great deal and bought it for my wife, because she thinks Pokemon are cute. I guess she hasn't seen Guzzlord, and she really liked it. So much so, she went until the credits rolled and thought it was interesting how you could redo the same levels and go on different paths, all while discovering new Pokemon. And what makes this game really stand out is the incredible graphics. This truly is the best looking Pokemon game on the Switch, mainly because that's all you're doing, looking. Smooth 60 frames per second, fantastic lighting, and even textures are way better compared to other Pokemon titles. It's not the best looking game on Switch, but compared to the other Pokemon games, it's incredible. On May 26, 2021, we finally got some release dates for the upcoming games. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl would release November 19th, 2021, just in time for the holiday sales season. And Pokemon Legends Arceus would follow a few months later on January 28th, 2022. And then continuing the trend of release date announcements, on June 17th, we learned that Pokemon Unite would launch the following month, only on Switch, and the mobile version would release later in the year. Remember that lawsuit about the Sword and Shield leaks a while back? Well, we finally got an update on them. 2 defendants were ordered to pay $150,000 each to the Pokemon Company for damages and legal fees. Apparently, the defendant worked for a company that was contracted to print the game's strategy guide, which was how they gained access to the info, and then in turn shared it online. That's a lot of money for sharing a couple pictures, so don't do that, just don't. On July 7th, we got some additional glimpses at Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl via a somewhat unexpected source. Nintendo announced a new model of Nintendo Switch, now with an OLED screen. And in this announcement trailer, the game could be seen running on the new system for a couple seconds. The only notable thing people noticed were some changes to the camera angle, but since the game is still in development, that could change. July 21st came and Pokemon Unite released to mixed reviews. I've never been a fan of top-down MOBA style games, so I haven't had the pleasure of getting hooked on this one. I remember when it first released, it was heavily known to be pay to win. This is very similar to my experience when I get in fistfights at GameStop when I talk about how Scarlet and Violet were rushed, so I played very little of this game. The game launched with a roster of 19 Pokemon including Pikachu, Charizard, Snorlax, Greninja, Mr. Mime, and more. Only a week later, the game received an update and its 20th Pokemon was added, Gardevoir. Adding new Pokemon to the game would thankfully be something they would continue doing to this day, as the roster is now over 61 Pokemon strong. Then at the end of July, we got news that the new Pokemon Snap would be getting a free update on August 3rd. This game would be adding 3 new areas: Florio Island Nature Park, Mighty Wide River, and Barren Badlands, which along with Mighty Wide would have both day and night variant. In addition, we'd get 20 more Pokemon to live out your paparazzi fantasies, including Snorlax, Psyduck, Shroomish, and Gyarados. Along with this, we got a few new quality of life updates, such as no longer having to exit a level in order to change the research level, being able to go right to camp without having your photos assessed, which sped things up quite a bit, and the ability to save photos directly to your Switch itself from the photo editing mode, as well as some additional titles, icons, filters, stickers, and frames. All of this for a low price of free. I wish they had released free content like this more often. It was also around the same time that a cheat device was making waves in the Sword and Shield community. Using a small device called the Switch Up, you could essentially automate shiny chaining. The important thing to note here is that the device is not hacking the game, just merely entering the inputs for you and taking care of the tedious work. All of the reward, none of the work. So the Pokemon you got from this were clean and could be used in tournaments and online without worry. Some people feel that this cheapens the experience of finding and catching a shiny, and I agree. But I mean, it's not really cheating, so you do you. We got a new Pokemon Presents on August 18th, 2021. Time for news on Pokemon Cafe! Yay! Nobody really cares that they decided to rename Pokemon Cafe Mix into Remix. For those who are into the free-to-play game, they were apparently going to refresh the puzzles and add new Pokemon and dress-up options. And of course, we can't forget about Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. We got to see a bunch of new stuff coming to these titles. Capsule decorations would allow you to use stickers you collect to decorate your Pokeballs, giving them unique effects when your Pokemon comes out. We also learned that Pokemon would follow you around on your adventure like in the Let's Go games. Some neat little graphics effects like the snow trail. We also get some character customization as we've come to expect in Pokemon games, as well as Super Contest minigame. The Union Room will allow you to interact with other trainers and battle or trade with them. And then there's the Grand Underground, which seemed pretty interesting. Explore Pokemon hideaways, so you can catch exclusive Pokemon through them, or create a secret underground base. A cool feature is that the statues you decorate your secret base with will affect what Pokemon show up in your hideaways. We got to see some of the updated visuals of Team Galactic and some other characters, but these are all from the original game, so no real surprises here for fans. But if you purchase the game at launch, you'll get some in-game items and Pokemon. We also learned about the new Special Edition Switch Lite that would be launching along with the game. The all-black Dialga and Palkia Edition Switch Lite is actually a callback to the Special Edition DS Lite that released back with the originals, with the same gold and silver artwork that was featured on the DS on the back of the Switch. I think this one's pretty slick looking. Definitely better than the Sword and Shield Special Edition. And finally, we got more Arceus news later in the presentation. It was clear from the trailer that this game would have more action elements than in previous Pokemon titles, which is a welcome addition. As mentioned before, the game takes place in the Sinnoh region, but before it was called that, back when it was known as the Hisui region, and the game takes place before people and Pokemon learn to live in harmony. And I have to say, it's weird that a trainer is getting attacked by a Pokemon. That's never been a thing in any of the previous games. In this game, you'll also be able to ride Pokemon to get around quicker by both land, sea, and air. Your base of operations would be Jubilife Village, and from here you'll join the Galaxy Expedition team, joining researchers and trainers dedicated to researching Pokemon. We were introduced to Professor Laventon, Celine, and Commander Kamado, which you'll no doubt have lots of interaction with. Your Survey Corps mission is to observe and catch Pokemon to shed light on how they live and how you can work together. When you head out, you'll have access to these base camps, which act sort of like Pokemon Center, but they mostly remind me of camps from Monster Hunter. And of course, the Pokemon in this game are all visible in the game world, and you'll need to sneak up and throw Pokeballs at them to catch them. All the wild Pokemon have different temperaments too. Some will be shy and attempt to run away from you. Some are aggressive and will attack you, and others appear that they may be friendly to the player. If it comes down to battle, you can toss out your Pokemon and have them battle. What's interesting here is that the turn system seems to have changed. The trackers on the right side show the turn order, and rather than the typical tennis matchup back and forth, one after the other, depending on the speed of your Pokemon, they could even get more than one attack per round. And this order can change based on the type of move you perform as you choose either strong or agile. Strong style will do more damage and agile goes faster. Definitely nice to see some extra strategy you can deploy in battles using this. And of course, we got to see some Pokemon, because that's what we're all here for after all. We see Weirdeer, which is an evolution of Stantler, Basculegion, which is an evolution of Basculin, a Hisuian Bravery, and a Hisuian Growlithe. So we do get regional variants. And as with Diamond and Pearl, if you purchase the game at launch, you get a special Growlithe themed outfit. Definitely all cool stuff that I couldn't wait to try out. This one's kind of out of scope, but it's on Switch, so we'll mention it. August 26th marked the launch of Pokemon TV, allowing you to watch Pokemon episodes, tournaments, animated specials, and more for free. Or at least you could, but not anymore. As of March 28th, 2024, Pokemon TV was officially discontinued, and its listing has been removed from the eShop. It was fun while it lasted. September ended with a pair of trailers for Diamond, Pearl, and Arceus. The trailer for the remakes was mostly focused around Poketech, which will allow you to access your HMs easily along with other apps like a watch, pedometer, and calculator for some reason. They showed off Poffins, which you can make with and feed your Pokemon in Amity Square, and some glimpses of more characters. The usual fare. Then for Arceus, we got to look at some new Pokemon with Cleaver, which is a bug rock type character, and boy does he look intimidating. No wonder why people were afraid of Pokemons with that running around. We also got to meet some of the Wardens, May, Isken, Lian, and Arzu, though they don't really explain what makes them special other than they protect special Pokemon. We also get to see that you'll be able to craft items as well as customize your outfit and hair to your liking. You'll also be able to pose and take photos with your favorite Pokemon buddies. I could not wait for this game to come out, but we still had a few months. On the 21st, we had a cool found footage style teaser for Arceus, focusing on an explorer with a video camera. It's a neat little video if you want to give it a watch. And in it, we are introduced to Hisuian, Zorua, and Zoroark. A couple days later, on the 26th, we got another trailer for Diamond and Pearl, showing off some of the gyms and gym leaders, as well as Team Galactic commanders and some of the legendary Pokemon that sleep under Sinnoh's lakes, with Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. And of course, just to remind you, in case you forgot, if you purchased the game at launch, you'd get a platinum outfit, as well as a Manaphy egg. And then to round off October, we had the remix update of Pokemon Cafe go live, which we talked about a bit earlier. November 5th, we saw the launch of Dialga and Palkia Special Edition Switch Lite. I think it's neat, but I don't know anyone who bought one. If you have one, let me know in the comments. We wouldn't be nearing a Pokemon game release if we didn't have some leaks now, would we? It turns out that some retailers broke street dates and people were playing the game as early as November 7th. And of course, with the games in players' hands, it would hard to avoid the barrage of leaked info. Hopefully, if you were looking to avoid spoilers during the time, you managed to somehow. With the game out this early, a bunch of players had already captured the game's legendaries with their massive head start. Definitely sucked for those who had to wait for the game's release properly. But we still had one more trailer to go before that happened. November 10th revealed some new details about the soon-to-be released game. A brand new area called Raminus Park would allow you to encounter some legendary Pokemon. By inserting the correct slate into the pedestal will cause a legendary Pokemon to appear, though it wasn't clear how these slates would be obtained. While on the topic of legendaries, it was confirmed that Mew and Rayquaza would be available, but some legendaries would be versions specific such as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, and Ho-Oh, which would be found in Brilliant Diamond, and Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, and Lugia would be in Shining Pearl. Also, the slates look like Game Boy cartridges. That's nice. Good callback. And then on November 19th, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl graced the Nintendo Switch with their presence, officially this time. Everyone who managed to avoid spoilers and leaks up to this point were rewarded with, well, a remake of a 15-year-old game. So I guess worrying about spoilers had been pretty dumb. This game was one of the only Pokemon games that kind of flew past my radar. I just really wasn't into this game when it released. And I think a part of it was because of how disappointed I was with Sword and Shield. So I skipped this one personally, but intend to play it later this year. The reviews were fairly okay, with Game Informer scoring it an 8.5 out of 10, while Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl don't move the needle in terms of what Pokemon games will look and play like moving forward. They most likely hit the mark in being faithful to the original, while Nintendo Life only scored it a 6, calling it a somewhat disappointing retread of Generation 4, with most of the complaints seemingly tied to the chibi art style they chose for the game, making the game feel cheaper and somehow worse than the original pixel art. And I can understand that. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and when compared to Sword and Shield and the upcoming Arceus, these games definitely lacked in the awe department. But of course, regardless of any reviews, the game sold well, even surpassing the sales of Sword and Shield in Japan, with almost 1.4 million copies sold in the first few days, with that number ballooning to over 6 million sales globally in its first week. On November 23rd, the first duplication glitch was found in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, allowing players to essentially clone Pokemon and items. They would release a patch on December 1st that didn't directly state that it fixed these exploits, but it appeared that it at least affected some of them, though a new one would be reported later in the month. It's always like a game of whack-a-mole with these kind of things. Or should I say, Whack-a-Drillbur, because it's a mole Pokemon. And on the same day, we got a small teaser trailer for Arceus, showing off Hisuian Voltorb, which looks like it's made out of some sort of wood, which makes sense as apparently this variant is electric and grass. On December 13th, the Pokemon Company decided to give everyone a little crafty side project as it released free 3D paper craft models for fans to download, print, and assemble. Now, while not as cool as the Pokemon Quest Labo in my opinion, at least we got access to these in North America. And to finish off the year, we got one more trailer for Arceus, this time introducing us to two of the clans, Diamond and Pearl. Who could have known? As well as their leaders Adaman and Irida, and the merchants of the Ginkgo Guild, because Pokemarch haven't been invented yet and I need to get my items somewhere. 2022 started off on a bit of a sour note, or a good one maybe, depending on if you were one of the few who managed to get a copy of Arceus early, as it appears though some people had their hands on copies as early as the 18th, 10 days before the official launch. By the following day, the game had already been data mined, and as such, the leaks were all over social media again, and the game was even being streamed streamed live on Twitch. This is why we can't have nice things. But the rest of us didn't have to wait long, because the day was finally upon us. Trevenant was added to Pokemon Unite! I mean, Pokemon Arceus was released. On January 28th, Arceus was released. But the sad part is, some players had actually already completed the game ahead of this. The reviews were pretty darn good this time around. VGC gave it a 5 out of 5, saying Pokemon Legends is a breath of fresh air the series has needed for so long. And Game Informer gave it an 8.75 out of 10, claiming Pokemon Legends Arceus is a worthwhile spin-off adventure, even as some of the concepts aren't fully developed, with an enticing gameplay loop, fun side activities, and a story I'm glad I saw through to the end. Pokemon Legends Arceus sets a solid foundation for what I hope is the next evolution for the series. For me, this game completely altered my opinion on Pokemon games. This is how it should be. This game is so good. I can easily make this my #1 Pokemon game on Switch. It was so different than the past games. They made almost everything I hated about the mainline Pokemon games better. They improved the speed of entering battles, and the speed of the fights are faster, and you know what's effective against what. They also made it so that I didn't have to fight each Pokemon to catch it, and added a stealth mechanic in the game to sneak up on Pokemon and increase the catch rate just by throwing Pokeballs. And they added unique missions to complete the Pokedex and research specific Pokemon. It's just a fantastic game that I couldn't get enough of. Now, all that being said, there were a few things I didn't love, like the horrendously long dialogue scenes that you couldn't skip that had no voice acting, or of course the half-baked graphics and performance. But overall, this was a fantastic leap forward for the Pokemon franchise, and I really hope that this is how it would stay. It was such a great game, but you can still kind of tell it was rushed for a deadline. And of course, the game sold like crazy, jumping to the top-selling game on Amazon in over 8 different countries. It also earned the franchise's best debut on Twitch, with peak viewership being almost twice that of Diamond and Pearl remakes. And to nobody's surprise, it sold over 6.5 million copies worldwide in the first week, which is really close to the same number that bought Diamond and Pearl. I guess the same people who buy Pokemon games also buy Pokemon games. Who'd have known? But let's not forget about Sword and Shield, who just a few weeks later officially became the second best-selling Pokemon game ever, beating out Gold and Silver with 23.9 million sales, but failing to surpass the original Red, Green, and Blue, which had a whopping 31.3 million copies sold at the time. It didn't take long until duplication glitches were also found for Arceus. Well, sort of. By February 8th, a method was discovered that let you clone by repeating a method that would usually result in them respawning. So not really a dupe, but also yes. Fun thing is, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I didn't actually find any evidence of this being patched out. So for all I know, this still works to this day. And in other weird news for Arceus, players found a secret room in the game full of modern furniture and electronics, including a Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu Switch, but none of it can be interacted with, though the only way of accessing this was via emulation on PC, and there was no way of accessing this natively on the Switch. Probably just a bit of leftover test code, but I found it interesting. Also, a strange glitch was discovered that would mess with the scaling of specific models, causing it to grow infinitely just by running in a circle around this one NPC. Harmless, but funny. On February 21st, version 1.2.0 of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl was released, but most people were busy playing Arceus at this point, so I'm not sure how many people noticed. In this, the Union Room functions were expanded, increasing the number of players you can play with up to 8, and you can now show off your trainer cards and capsule decorations to each other. You could also enter the second floor of the Pokemon Center to battle other players using custom rules such as the number of Pokemon allowed, level restrictions, and single, double, or multi-battles. And to cap this off, they found a way of essentially banning Pokemon that were duped or obtained through other illicit means from link trades or link battles. But this was all quickly overshadowed by the announcement of Scarlet and Violet on February 27, 2022. Generation 9 was coming. Had Game Freak finally learned their lessons? The trailer itself was part live action and part gameplay. The live action part was actually a nice touch, but I always appreciate when these companies get creative like that. The rest of the trailer was pretty much sweeping shots for the new open world and some of the Pokemon. The Pokemon themselves look pretty good, but looking back, you can actually see a lot of the graphical and performance issues the game would face already on display. But it was relatively early in development and people were optimistic. We also got a quick glimpse at the new starter Pokemon for Gen 9, with Sprigatito, Fuecoco, and Quaxly. Scarlet and Violet were set to release sometime in late 2022. There were a bunch of questions this trailer raised though. The first was the removal of the National Dex in Sword and Shield. Would Scarlet and Violet restore this? Or would we be facing an entirely new round of cuts? If so, a lot of the Pokemon we just caught and were attached to in Sword and Shield might not be transferable into the game. Would the game return to its tried and true formula, or would it get inspiration from Arceus and have new capture and gameplay mechanics? We'd have to wait and find out. At this time, we also received word of an update for Arceus. Daybreak would be part of the 1.1 update, and to our surprise, it would be releasing later in the same day. In this update, you're tasked with investigating cascades of Pokemon outbreaks. These take place via new requests after you finish the base game, adding some additional endgame activities for this title. There were some other additions like some new battles added to the training grounds, new features in the photo studio, and more. Can't complain about free content. On top of that, as a special gift for Pokemon Day, players would be able to claim a bunch of special Pokeballs. If you were still one of the brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl players, you weren't forgotten. Players of these games would receive a free mythical Pokemon, Shaman. For players of Pokemon Cafe Remix, you'd be getting a new way to play via deliveries, as well as some additional Pokemon added including Victini, and they would be running a few special events for Pokemon Day. On March 15th, Diamond and Pearl players got version 1.3, and along with that, mythical Pokemon Arceus and Darkrai were available to capture. Another milestone for Unite, as by April 13th, 2022, it had surpassed more than 70 million downloads, and by May 10th, 2022, Pokemon Legends Arceus had exceeded 12 million sales. It wasn't until June 1st that we would get some more Scarlet and Violet info. In this trailer, we were introduced to our new professors. Yes, professors. Two of them, Sada and Toro, though the one you get would depend on the version of the game you play. We also got to meet our new rival, Nemona, as well as some various footage of Pokemon battles, including some of the first footage of the new starter Pokemon in action. And we'd be getting multiplayer allowing up to 4 players to explore the open world of Paldea together, and you'd be able to differentiate yourself from your friends with a pretty expensive selection of customization features. And we also got introduced to the 2 legendary Pokemon for this generation, Koraidon and Miraidon, who appear to be part motorcycle and part hoverbike. Weird, but this is Pokemon we're talking about. They've always been a little bit out there. It's also Japanese. And along with these, we got some new Gen 9 Pokemon with the little piggy Pokemon Lechonk, the grass-type Smoliv, and new rival looking to take up Pikachu's gig as a resident electric rodent. On June 10th, we got some insight as to how well Pokemon games have been selling. By this point in time, the Pokemon Company had sold over 440 million copies of Pokemon games, up from the 380 million reported the previous year, meaning that in the last year alone, it had sold at least 60 million copies. So clear to see that they are making some serious bang. And on June 23rd, Switch owners who had the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack were able to relive the nostalgia of the original Pokemon Snap on Nintendo 64 with their subscription. July marked the first anniversary of Pokemon Unite, and to celebrate, they released a roadmap showing some of the new Pokemon in game mode you'd be able to play as part of the celebration, including the new Boss Rush, in which you team up to battle powerful Pokemon. On August 3rd, we got another Pokemon Presents. Let's start off with the Unite updates. Buzzwole was added to the game, as well as a new battle mode called Pika Party, where everyone plays as Pikachu. For Cafe Remix, Mewtwo would be returning along with the new 1-minute cooking puzzle mode, and Latios and Latias both were coming to the game. And then the new Scarlet and Violet got a new trailer showing off some new stuff. The first thing that stood out to me was that it appeared as if this time around, the game finally had voice acting as they dubbed this portion of the trailer. Though as we would come to learn, this was not the case. Why did they tease us like this? It's like they knew they added voice acting, so that's why they added it here. But it actually was never in the game itself. This new trailer did, however, confirm that we would be able to ride the 2 legendary Pokemon. After all, they both have Rhydon in their name. And from the looks of it, we'd be encountering them pretty early in the story. The game would be an open world with a non-linear story, which was a departure from other games in the series. In this one, you'd be able to choose your route in order in which you tackle gyms. And there would be 2 other storylines for you to engage with. And we got to see Terrestrialization, which looks to be this version's equivalent of Mega Evolutions or Dynamax, which appears to turn Pokemon into gem versions. All Paldea Pokemon can terrestrialize, which can also affect their type when they transform. The rare Terra types will show up more often in Terra raid battles. Speaking of which, I don't think it's a coincidence that these feel like a lot like the raids from Pokemon Go. And at the end, you'll have a chance to try and catch the Pokemon you just battled. As for the differences between the 2 games, we learned earlier about the professors and legendaries, but in addition, the name and crest of your school would change depending on your version as well. And if you purchase the game early, you'd get a unique Pikachu with the Fly Terra type that wears a hat made from balloons. On August 21st, we'd get another small reveal during the return of the World Championships with the reveal of Cyclizar, which appears to be a motorcycle lizard, which definitely looks related to the 2 legendaries. I wonder what sort of mileage it gets. And then on September 1st, we got a new documentary found footage style trailer, sort of like the one we had earlier for Arceus, though this time for Scarlet and Violet. In it, we get introduced to a new Pokemon, Grafaiai, the toxic monkey. I don't know how to pronounce that name. And on the 7th, we got the announcement of a new Scarlet and Violet themed special edition Switch OLED. This version would have red and purple Joy-Cons with the individual school badges on them. And on the back, this colorful graffiti style art of the starters, and the front of the dock has artwork of the legendaries. This would be available on November 4th, 2 weeks before the game's launch. But as we've come to expect by now, a copy of the game was not included. We also got another trailer for Scarlet and Violet. In this one, we learned about the 3 story paths. Victory Road, which would be the traditional gym battle storyline, the Path of Legends, which is the search for a rare health restoring herb, and Starfall Street, which is the Team Star storyline. Speaking of Team Star, we also learned a bit about them, which appears to be a gang of rebellious students which consist of multiple squads, each with their own boss. And the bosses have Starmobiles, which you'll need to defeat alongside them. And when you're out exploring the world, you'll be able to have your Pokemon auto-battle wild Pokemon around you so you can spend your time doing things while your Pokemon earns XP and gathers items from the victory. The trailer also shows off some additional new Pokemon, Cloth, Armorogue, and Cerulege, of which Cloth looks to play a big part in the Path of Legends storyline, and some returning Pokemon were confirmed, such as Sudowoodo, Shroomish, Sunkern, Sneasel, Drowsy, and more. To end September, Wiglet was revealed via its own trailer. Needless to say, the internet immediately memed on this new Pokemon and its design, none of which I can show here without getting demonetized. If you've got an imagination, use it. And then on October 6th, we got another new trailer showing off the picnic feature, where you can make sandwiches with your Pokemon that you can share with them for various bonuses, as well as crafting systems which will let you craft TMs using item drops from defeated Pokemon. We also got to meet a new Pokemon with Girafarig and its evolution, Farigiraf. The new Pokedex was shown off as well, which looks like it's taken inspiration from Apple Newsstand or Library, which is fitting for the game's school theme. We also got to see more of the in-depth character customization options, including haircuts, eye shape, eyelashes, eyebrows, beauty marks, freckles, colored contacts, lip shape, and makeup options, so you can really make the trainer you've always envisioned. And then show that off with a selfie from the camera app with poses and filters. We also learned a bit more about Terra, and there being 18 Terra types in total. But one thing started to stand out with this trailer, and that was the visuals. The game looked to be running visibly poorly on Switch, with low levels of detail, reduced poly counts, low frame rates, and poor muddy looking textures. Hopefully they fix that up before release. Then a week later, we got a different style trailer styled like a live stream announcement from the influencer themed gym leader Iono, with her hinting at the reveal of her partner Pokemon, which would end up being revealed officially a few days later as Bellabolt, an electric frog Pokemon. On October 21st, the performance issues were confirmed as the Pokemon Company invited game journalists for a hands-on look at the game, and the consensus was that the performance issues distracted from the new features of this title. While the impressions of the gameplay itself were pretty good, Eurogamer voiced the concerns about the performance, stating, "Menus are slow and noticeably laggy, and animations are hugely choppy, with NPCs moving like flicker book drawings even at a close distance, and town buildings loading in as you walk through their streets." And I played a few Pokemon game previews now, and Scarlet and Violet are without a doubt the roughest feeling of those. Nintendo Life noted that the game appeared to be running at 720p with little or no anti-aliasing, and struggling to reach the target 30 frames per second, and textures looking extremely smeary. We got introduced to another new Pokemon on October 25th with Graveyard, a ghost-type dog Pokemon. Is this what happens when you bake Fido too long? On November 4th, 2022, the special edition Scarlet and Violet Switch was released, and I actually really like this one. In fact, I even bought one. If you'd like to see more about that, check out my unboxing video after this one. And 2 days later, another new Pokemon was revealed with Gimmighoul, a ghost-type Pokemon that hides in a treasure chest. Some of them will appear in its roaming form, out in the games carrying a single coin and running away as soon as someone approaches. Could this be a new collectible? And of course, a few weeks ahead of launch, the game leaked, with at least one person managing to get their hands on a copy ahead of its release date. Fans were urged to avoid social media for the next few weeks if they were concerned about spoilers. Not to be deterred by the leaks, a new trailer was released on the 8th, showing some new specific Pokemon, with Great Tusks being exclusive to Scarlet and Iron Treads being exclusive to Violet. We also learned that if you have saved data on your Switch from previous Pokemon games, you can unlock different phone cases for your Rotom. And if you are a Unite player, if you play on Switch and have Scarlet and Violet save data, you'll get the school uniform outfits in Unite. At this time, the evolved forms of the starter Pokemon Sprigatito were leaked, including the fully evolved form Meowscarada. Furries everywhere once again rejoiced. Then a few days later, the entire ROM of the game had been uploaded to the internet, allowing people with modded Switches to download and play the game early, or for PC users to emulate. In fact, people were playing Scarlet and Violet on their Steam decks before they even launched on Switch. We truly live in wild times. We got one final trailer a couple days before the planned launch of Scarlet and Violet on the 15th of November, but nothing really new was shown here, just a recap of the earlier announced features for those joining the show late. Then the day was finally upon us. On November 18th, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet officially released for the Switch, and oh boy, was it rough. At times, the game both looked and performed terribly. This definitely did not feel like the quality we deserved for the new flagship Pokémon game. From the low resolution textures to the terrible pop-in, the delay on everything you do, including menus, the choppy animations, the lack of voice acting, the fact most shops were just menus and not physical locations, and even then they felt so slow that you didn't even want to use them. And of course, the laughable picnic animations that felt like they were made in MS Paint. We weren't mad, we were disappointed. Okay, maybe we were a little mad. If you've seen my video that I released over a year ago about this game, you might already know my opinion. They completely took a massive step back when you compare it to Arceus. And I know they're two completely different games, but after playing such a fantastic take of the Pokemon franchise from Arceus, I really hope they brought some of that freshness to a new mainline game. But I was horribly wrong. While there were some decent upgrades to the classic Pokemon formula, this game's main issue for me was the slower gameplay loop compared to Arceus, and the graphics and performance. I don't care if you die for this game, there is absolutely no chance you can ignore the performance issues. This made it extremely hard to get through, and on top of the older style of gameplay, it made me kind of frustrated to play. And I bought the double pack too! I even tried to pick it up again for this video to see if it had gotten any better, and had to put it down within just a few minutes as the glaring issues that made the game frustrating to play were still present in this game. And the reviews for this game were conflicted. GameSpot gave this game an impressive 8 out of 10, stating, while undercooked presentation and visual issues hold the game back, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are still the best mainline games in years, while others such as The Guardian were completely distracted by the poor performance of the game, saying, it's not hyperbole to say that Scarlet and Violet is one of the worst looking and running games I've ever played. But regardless of the quality, the game sold like crazy, surpassing over 20 million copies sold in just 6 weeks. And really, we only have ourselves to blame for this poor quality of a release. We've shown Game Freak and the Pokemon Company that no matter how bad the quality is, we'll give them dump trucks of money every time. So what incentive do they have to improve? It's just incredibly disappointing that the developer of arguably the largest and most profitable franchise in the world doesn't want to put the time and care to making the absolute best Pokemon experience that they can. It makes me a sad lad. The day after release, we got the first mod for Scarlet and Violet. Apparently, some people really hated the Ed Sheeran song that was included in the games, as that was the first thing they asked. Of course, you'd have to be running emulation or a modded Switch for this, but I just find it funny that that was the first thing people decided that needed to get fixed. But now that the game was in the hands of the player base, it was becoming apparent the game had more glitches than a Ubisoft release, and videos of these issues started popping up everywhere, including cameras clipping into terrain, glitched out animations, players growing massive when mounting their Pokemon, invisible walls, falling through the map, invisible mounts, and much more. It was pretty laughable the state the game released in, and fans were not happy as they took to Metacritic to vent their frustrations, plunging the user score to a measly 2.9 out of 10. If you still weren't sold on the poor state of this game, November 21st, only 3 days after launch, some intrepid fans found out that if you connected a second controller and held both direction sticks at the same time, you could essentially speed hack yourself. And another glitch was found that allowed you to completely skip the first day of school and by consequence lock out a large portion of the game's story. And how did Nintendo respond? By issuing DMCA takedowns, though not in the way you might first expect. They set their sights firmly on emulation and issued takedown requests of all entries of Steam Grid DB, a well-known custom Steam game art site that featured Switch games including Pokemon, Splatoon, Xenoblade, and more. Glad to see they were focused on doing this and not, doing anything about their new flagship game. It was only another day later that the first duplication glitch was found, letting you seamlessly catch infinite shinies. While duplication glitches and Pokemon are no strangers, it's just another indication at how poorly this entry in the series was coded. And then the influx of people requesting refunds for the game started pouring in. Players unhappy with the state of the performance of the game started requesting refunds of their eShop purchased games. Normally Nintendo doesn't allow refunds on their eShop games. The only one they've ever let me return is Panty Party, but that was just because it went on sale and I wanted to get it for a cheaper price. But some fans were having luck contacting them and making the request, though many others were stuck with their purchase. On November 28th, 2022, a group of YouTubers decided to show us how sorely voice acting was needed in this game and released a video of themselves dubbing over some of the game's cutscenes. It's worth the watch if you wanted to see what Game Freak could have done if they weren't too busy counting their piles of cash. On December 1st, the first patch for Scarlet and Violet dropped, and it appeared to help alleviate some of the issues players were having, but it was far from a fix for all those bugs and performance issues the game was facing. While Scarlet and Violet may have left a bad taste in some players' mouths, a pair of YouTubers from the channel Underleveled decided to replace it with something else by making and tasting all of the game's 150 sandwich combinations. What do you think of Canadians who generally think of one of two things? Igloos, or them being overly polite, please. And to show that this stereotype is for a reason, Nintendo of Canada stated in an interview with Post Arcade in regards to the state of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, "You know, we absolutely apologize. It is so important to give players a positive experience with our games. And when this doesn't happen, we do take it very much to heart. Sorry, eh?" Not to be deterred, on February 27, 2023, during the annual Pokemon Day Pokemon Presents, the Pokemon Company announced DLC for Scarlet and Violet, the Hidden Treasure of Area Zero. The DLC would again be split into two parts like Sword and Shield. The first part would be the Teal Mask. The second would be the Indigo Disc. The Teal Mask has you visit the land of Kitamaki as part of a school trip, while the Indigo Disc have you take part in a student exchange program at Blueberry Academy. Not a ton was announced as this was more of a teaser, but we did learn about the new legendary Pokemon, the grass-type Ogerpon, and the turtle Terapagos. Alongside this announcement, we got a bit of news for Unite players as well. That very same day, Zacian, the Sword Doggo from Sword and Shield, was added to Unite. And for Cafe Remix players, Sprigatito, Fuecoco, and Quaxly, the Scarlet and Violet starter Pokemon for those who have been paying attention, were added into the game as well. Also, Scarlet and Violet got their second patch, which consisted of some bug fixes and some additional functionality to Pokemon boxes. Though a few days later, it was discovered that the new patch caused some issues of its own, with the bug causing Terra Raid Paradox Pokemon that were part of the new game event were instantly replaced with an egg. If this was in April, I would have thought this was an April Fool's joke, but it was only the 1st of March. And keeping on topic of Scarlet and Violet bugs, another glitch was discovered that let you zoom the camera all the way out into space by building a sandwich. Apparently, if you set your table in a specific spot and kept dropping chorizo sausage, the camera would zoom further and further out each time. In space, nobody can hear you munch. On April 11, 2023, fans were reunited with an old favorite. Pokemon Stadium was added to the Nintendo 64 library, included with Nintendo Switch Online. This fully 3D Pokemon battling game was much adored when we still only had the original 151 Pokemon to play around with. And now you could relive the nostalgia on the Switch. On April 19th, the third patch for Scarlet and Violet released, fixing that earlier egg bug thankfully. The rest were basic bug fixes. On June 21st, we got a Nintendo Direct with some updates for the Scarlet and Violet DLC. The Teal Mask would be launching that fall and would take place in a lush mountainous region and would see the return of Sentret, Puchayina, and Yanma. The second DLC, set to come out in the winter, would take place in an underwater world and would see the return of Metagross, Milotic, and even an Alolan Executor. We also got a release date for the Detective Pikachu game that was announced way back when. Detective Pikachu Returns would be released on October 6, 2023. About 3 years too late, as the hype of the movie, which had been released back in 2019, has all but evaporated by this point. On August 8th, we got another Pokemon Presents. First, Detective Pikachu Returns got another trailer. This one a preview of the game narrated by the detective himself. Tatsugiri would be coming to Pokemon Cafe Remix. A new game mode called Panic Parade, which was sort of tower defense game, was announced for Pokemon Unite. And Mega Mewtwo Y was added to the game, and the Nintendo Switch Online subscription would get 2 more games that day, the classic Pokemon trading card game for Game Boy, as well as Pokemon Stadium 2. Now onto the DLC news. The release date for the Teal Mask was set for September 13th later this year. In it would be a new minigame called Ogre Ousting, where you pop ogre balloons for Mochi that can help improve the base stats of your Pokemon. They would also be adding a Roto Stick, which would allow you to take wider selfies in the game, just what the game needed so badly, a selfie stick. We of course got to see some new glimpses of new characters and new locations that would be coming as well, as some new Pokemon that would be added to the game with Dipplin, Arcaludon, Raikou, and Cobalion. A couple days later, we would also learn that just like with Sword and Shield, a physical copy of the game, which includes the DLC, would be coming in the future for those diehard collectors or players who haven't purchased the base game yet. While we all know that hacked Pokemon exist, it's not too often that they find their way into the official Pokemon World Championships. But that's just what happened on August 11th, 2023, as a series of stricter checks disqualified a number of professional players. A new trailer released on August 13th showing off some new returning favorites for the hidden treasure of Area Zero, including Torchic, Cyndaquil, Oshawott, Snivy, Rowlet, Froakie, and more, adding to the number of Pokemon you'd be able to bring with you on your adventure. On August 14th, the COO of the Pokemon Company actually addressed some of the issues surrounding the recent releases. Takato Utsunomiya told comicbook.com, "I think in general, if you look at the past, the path we've taken up until now have been this constant release, always regularly releasing product on a fairly fixed kind of a cadence. and I think we're still operating in that way. But there's more and more conversations as the development environments change about how we can continue to do this, while making sure that we're ensuring really quality products are also being introduced. While not directly acknowledging the shortcomings from Scarlet and Violet, it sounds like they're finally starting to listen to the outcry from the Pokemon fans. The day came that the first DLC for Scarlet and Violet released on September 13th, and initial impressions seemed pretty good, with fans of the game enjoying the story, despite some of the lingering technical issues present in the game. But if you were still playing at this point, you've already made your peace with those. CG Magazine said that, despite its flaws, the Teal Mask DLC, with its fresh setting and intriguing side quests, amplifies the experience of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, perfect for those seeking a return trip to the vibrant world of Paldea. But others like Nintendo Life only scored it a 6 of 10, saying it was an experience that delivers some rich regional storytelling, great characters, and some fantastic new Pokemon. We wanted more though, more love and care put into the visuals and the battles. The Indigo Disc has a chance to build on the foundations the Teal Mask has laid, and we hope that's exactly what it will do. September 14th, 2023, another trailer for Detective Pikachu returns, just showing off some features of the game. Some of the visuals look pretty rough, like they're still drafts or something. On October 6th, Detective Pikachu Returns released to moderate reviews. VGC gave it 3 out of 5, saying Detective Pikachu is full of simple puzzles, witty dialogue, and Pokemon to discover. It won't thrill older fans from a gameplay perspective, and it's visually inconsistent, but it will likely introduce thousands of young fans to a whole new genre of video games. And IGN gave it a 6 out of 10, mentioning that it's still a cute, bubbly animated adventure with humor, unique Pokemon to meet, and a mystery to solve. But the mystery solving is long-winded, the visuals are lackluster, and the gameplay is so basic it might as well not be there at all. And Nintendo Life also pointed out the relatively poor visuals, saying, "The biggest issue we have personally with Detective Pikachu is that it looks unforgivably drab, and it just doesn't feel like enough effort was made to really make characters or environments pop with color or detail." As for me, well, Detective Pikachu is one of the Pokemon games I was never really expecting, with the whole Talking Pikachu thing, but was popular enough to get its own movie, which did pretty well and I enjoyed. Detective Pikachu Returns is a direct sequel to its predecessor on 3DS, and this is more of the same but without the second touchscreen. This game is a classic whodunit type of game, and if you're into that, you're into it. It's not really my style of game, but it's not horrible. What is horrible is the complete lack of care put into these graphics. Even when the game was first announced, it was clear Detective Pikachu Returns was not going to make use of the hardware on Nintendo Switch. The character models look bland, the frame rate is meh, and the lighting and shading were less than stellar. It just lacked the personality for me to even care about this game in the slightest. On November 3rd, we learned when the second half of the Scarlet and Violet DLC would be releasing, December 14th, 2023, via a somewhat low-key tweet from the Pokemon Company. And on December 7th, we got our final trailer for the Indigo Disc ahead of its launch. In this trailer, we got to see some returning legendary Pokemon from previous games, including Moltres, Suicune, Rayquaza, and more. But you have to catch these via Blueberry quests, which are only available after you complete the story. Miraidon and Koraidon would also be able to unlock the ability to fly by essentially playing Pilot Wings, and you'd be able to experience the world through the eyes of your Pokemon via the Synchro Machine. It also hinted at some returning starter Pokemon that fans would be happy to see, including Piplup and Squirtle. On the same day, Meowscarada was also added to Unite, and the furries continue to rejoice. This video's taken so long that my shirt has changed. And on December 14th, 2023, the second DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet released, and it was received about as well as the previous piece of DLC, but with a few extra criticisms, such as Kotaku, who stated, "The game still feels like a concept that hasn't been fully realized. It has all the features of a great evolution of Pokemon's design and narrative, buried by a game barely holding together." Or Screen Rant, who summed it up with, "Like the Teal Mask and the base games before it, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Indigo Disc is a fine experience that just feels like it needed more time to cook. The new features and additions made it an enjoyable DLC, but the performance problems occur frequently and are often distracting." And Nintendo Life scored it a 6 of 10, concluding that if you love Pokemon, you'll absolutely enjoy what's on offer here. But the DLC drops the ball in terms of narrative, offering an unsatisfying and rushed conclusion to Scarlet and Violet's story, along with the grindy BP system and those ever-present performance issues, noting that somehow the performance and visuals managed to actually get even worse than they were before. So if you were watching this and wondering if they ever fixed those performance issues, no, they didn't. If anything, they're worse now. But wait, December 20th, 2023, the Pokemon Company announced that a free epilogue DLC would release the following year on January 11th, 2024, hopefully giving a more satisfying ending and conclusion to Scarlet and Violet and the hidden treasure of Area Zero. And to end 2023, Metagross joined the Pokemon Unite roster, bringing the total number of playable Pokemon in that game up to over 60. With even our boy Gyarados, who released in January of 2024. January 11th came around And Scarlet and Violet's free epilogue DLC was released, finally bringing a conclusion to the storyline for Gen 9. In order to experience the DLC, you first have to complete the base game and finish the main stories of both DLC expansions. So if you haven't bothered to buy any previous DLC, then you're out of luck for this one. The free DLC reunites your character with some friends you made along the way, and provided another hour or two of gameplay, and along with it, a new mythical Pokemon in the form of Peturunt. The biggest potential issue though is how the DLC was delivered. As noted by Screen Rant, instead of downloading from the eShop, the DLC is only accessible via activating a mystery gift in the game, which doesn't seem like a big deal at first, but mystery gifts can expire. So what happens if you're not able to receive that gift? Will you just never be able to play the epilogue? Was this some way of Game Freak and the Pokemon Company trying to capitalize on players' fear of missing out and try to sell more copies of the Teal and Indigo DLC? Who knows? Only the future will tell. On January 19th, 2024, something unexpected happened. A new challenger appeared in the form of Palworld, an open-world survival game where you explore, build, capture, train, and battle some suspiciously familiar-looking monsters. Now officially, Palworld is only available on Xbox and PC, so how much of a competitor this is to Pokemon, which is a Nintendo exclusive, is debatable. But what it did show was how sorely lacking Pokemon titles have become. This game came out from a small independent developer with a budget a mere fraction of what Pokemon games get, and they delivered an entirely new modern feeling experience. It downright makes the current Pokemon games feel archaic in comparison. And while this game lacks in story and narrative compared to the Pokemon titles, it gave us a glimpse of what could be if Game Freak actually gave their games the love and effort they deserve. If anything, Palworld has charm and soul, which Pokemon has lacked now for generations. Now, to be fair, this game wasn't limited by Nintendo's aging hardware, so it's difficult to get a direct comparison in regards to scale and performance. But this game just felt so fresh. It felt like what we wanted from a Pokemon game. But regardless of its success, or perhaps a product of it, Pokemon and Nintendo fanboys were not happy with how similar some of the pals came to copying existing Pokemon, with many users on Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube all making comparisons and pointing out similarities. Though it's important to note that the Pokemon Company themselves have taken no action against the developers of the game, and Palworld's lawyers have stated that all their designs meet the criteria required to avoid any copyright infringement upon any existing work. And yeah, anyone with eyes can tell that some of these designs are really close. But rather than straight up copies, they look like Pokemon that you just buy on Temu. However, Nintendo would take action against one Palworld modder who had actually started modding Pokemon into the game. User Toasted Shoes initially uploaded a teaser video of his mod to YouTube, which was promptly taken down by Nintendo shortly after. In retaliation, Toasted Shoes released a video of a new mod they created featuring legally distinct pocket-sized creatures, such as everyone's favorite Yellow Rat, Vegetative Turtle, and DMCA Notice, clearly meant to just troll Nintendo in a goofy manner. But really, Game Freak wasn't hurting from this at all, as by February 6, 2024, Scarlet and Violet surpassed Gold and Silver to become the third best-selling Pokemon game behind Sword and Shield and the original Red, Green, and Blue after selling over 24.3 million copies. Wait. Maybe they should be worried, as in its first month, Palworld already had over 25 million players across Xbox and PC, though that includes Game Pass players, and the price of the game is only $30. So in terms of revenue generated, Scarlet and Violet are still miles ahead, but hopefully this lights a fire under Game Freak. February 27th, 2024. Pokemon Day was here again. It's a day when the Pokemon Company typically announces what games will be next in the series. With Generation 9 coming to a close, would we see a Gen 10 already? Rumors were currently swirling about remakes of Gold and Silver, as the Pokemon channel on YouTube had tagged the original Pokemon Gold and Silver to their presentation announcement short. And that'd be really cool, as both of those games were amazing. But alas, we weren't that lucky. But we were pleasantly surprised when Pokemon ZA was announced, aside from it having a little bit of a weird name. This was a very early teaser though, as we don't really have much information on the game itself or what it will be like, aside from it being set within Lumio City, which makes it appear as it may be set in a future setting or maybe VR, I don't know. What's interesting though is in the description of the trailer itself. Pokemon ZA, an ambitious new entry to the Pokemon video game series, will launch on Nintendo Switch systems in 2025. Nintendo Switch systems, plural. Does this mean that it's coming to the Switch 2 or whatever the Switch successor is called? To me, it just sounds like it's going to probably be releasing on the current variation of Switch models, like the OLED model or the Lite model. But I guess it also could be Switch 1 and 2. Cross-generation? Who knows? But I'm not going to lie, it is a little scary to think that the Switch 1 will still be our main console in 2025. I don't know. Speaking of 2025, this would make 2024 the first year we wouldn't be seeing a new Pokemon game on Switch since its launch, unless they drop a surprise on us later this year. And that's it. that brings us to today. We'll have to see what the rest of 2024 and beyond has in store for Pokemon as we move forward, and we can only hope they've learned from some of their mistakes they've made along the way getting here. And while it's evident that Pokemon is still the same money-making juggernaut that it's always been, it's become quite clear that the games themselves have lacked the care and polish that such a beloved franchise and you, its fans, deserve. Do you think that Pokemon ZA will reignite the Pokemon franchise on Switch? Let me know in the comments. Please consider liking and subscribing, and if you want to see these videos early and support me, consider becoming a member. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.